like Vietnam. Oh, that too.
Welcome to the Bad Guys, everybody.
Oh,
this
God.
week, 36%.
Hey, guys.
Today is November 16th. My name is Brett,
And I am Adam.
and we have a lot of news to talk about this week.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
So thankfully, we can finally stop talking about the election for the most part. We can get back to the crazy, crazy world that we live in and the crazy, crazy events that happen on a crazy, crazy day-to-day basis.
Basically, because it is a mad world, trademark.
Yeah, so we're going to get kind of back on track with our 50% current events, 50% political science topics this week. We have no lack of current events to cover.
That we do. A lot of international stuff has gone on since we have started, doing the election coverage. We're gonna play a little catch up here.
Yeah, we took a deep dive into Missouri politics and
Quite
local
literally.
stuff last week, quite literally.
Head first.
And so this week, we're going to look a little more internationally. We're going to start with all the headlines, and then our second half of the podcast, we're going to get a little bit more into what we witnessed over Veterans Day and our crumbling relations with the rest of the world.
Exactly. So we're gonna pop our periscope up through the mist that was the 2018 midterm election.
Yep.
And vastly gaze over the bow of the ship.
Yep.
At
Vastly
the
gaze.
rest of the world.
We're going to vastly gaze.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense, but I like it. It sounds good.
We will gaze vastly.
We'll
at the
cast
rest
a
of the world.
we'll cast a vast gaze.
That we will. We'll search. We'll scan. Like mixed scanning. I've been doing too much policy, everyone.
So without further ado,
Let's get into it.
All right, everybody. So to get started, to get into things, today being November 16th, today alone we had a bunch of different news stories break. First and foremost, a news story that's near and dear to my heart is the federal judge ruled in CNN's favor in regards to getting Jim Acosta his press privileges back, his White House press privileges back. So for those of you who don't know, about, a week or two ago.
It was Wednesday.
It was
Last
Wednesday?
Wednesday.
Of this week or last week?
Last week.
Last week.
Yeah, right after the election, Brett.
Well, listen, you act like I can keep any sort of detail of a timeline in my head. But regardless, on Wednesday of last week, Jim Acosta, the CNN White House reporter, got into a little bit of a spat. We talked about it in the last pod. But the repercussions of that were the president pretty much personally revoked his White House press privileges. It is not a guarantee for every news service to have White House press privileges. It is something that is essentially earned or bestowed. However, we have no instances of a president ever personally saying, hey, I want this person to no longer have privilege. We have had instances of members of the press being kicked out for actual violations or for unprofessional behavior, things like that. But usually there's a strict code to follow. In this instance, it was very much just taking essentially a personal relationship of Trump not liking Jim Acosta and saying, you're done. So CNN sued in federal court. And as of today, the judge said, hey, you can't do that, the White House.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's an interesting distinction to make because CNN is kind of touting this as a victory for the First Amendment. A lot of people want to take this as a victory for the First Amendment, saying the president cannot silence the press. He cannot selectively choose who is and isn't in the press room. And basically what the court said is that, yes, we have a freedom to the press in this country, but the press does not have a right to be in the White House. They came down on the side of CNN for due process, under the Fifth Amendment for a due process reasoning, citing that Jim Acosta's due process was violated insofar that there are rules and regulations as to how you go about revoking someone's press privileges, essentially, and none of that was followed. We've had circumstances in the past where reporters have been taken to court or have taken the White House to court saying you didn't do this correctly, and the courts have said, well, the White House did follow these rules that they have in place, and so they were right in doing that.
So basically what it came down to was, with it, the initial reasoning behind revoking his press pass was because of, they claimed that he laid hands on an intern that was trying to rip the microphone out of his hand,
Right.
which, as video evidence shows, which we talked about last time about how the White House doctored the evidence,
Yeah.
Well, like Harrison Ford. You switched the samples. Yeah.
At the very least, they redistributed someone who doctored it, whether or not they did it themselves.
Yeah.
I don't know,
Okay.
but
Regardless, they were spreading false information as per usual. And then that was a reasoning, but then there was other reasoning about how that was just disrespectful to the president and all that stuff. And Sarah Sanders came out with a saying of reasoning, and so there was just a bunch of different conflicting reports.
He's a very rude person.
Yeah,
very
and so
rude person, terrible person, very rude.
Brett, you sound like Scrooge.
I've never been good at a Trump impersonation.
That's
all
okay.
I got. I get
neither.
the cadence, not the accent.
Anyways, so it was because of all of these conflicting reasons for firing him that this case did go forward.
Right.
Additionally, though, the court did they did side upon that there was personal damages being done to Acosta by not being able to be there.
Yeah.
And there was some other stuff, but that was the gist of it, though.
Yeah, and it does look like the White House is actually going to be compliant with this court order. It doesn't look like they're going to appeal. Jim Acosta already has his credentials back, and Sarah Sanders came out today saying that the White House is going to put together a comprehensive set of rules, basically, that you have to follow and procedures for revoking people's press privileges. So something to keep an eye out on, but, at least they're abiding by this court order in a sense. And it shows that, the White House can't just get away with whatever it wants to do. So it's a good thing it's a good piece of news to come out of today.
It was. I think, and what it also does is I think it establishes some limit upon, like the White House has been extremely confrontational towards, all forms of the free press, the quote unquote liberal
not all
media.
forms. Just
basically any form
every form that's not Fox News.
Every credible form of news,
Right.
the White House has been heavily critical of and against, and this it really shows that there is a limit to which they can harass and like beat up on the press, and so I think it's a good sign.
Yeah,
it's a good sign.
Yeah. And in terms of adversarial identity politics, Fox News actually did sign on to CNN's lawsuit.
Fox News was they were like, oh yeah, we don't want this happening.
Yeah, this isn't best. So, we still have a little bit of cohesion in our identity of maintaining our freedoms and our rights and things like that. So that's a little encouraging. Again, good piece of news to come out of today.
Agreed.
So, moving on past that, what else we got for this week, Adam?
This has been something interesting. This is something to look forward to. Because I think a lot of the reason behind Acosta getting kicked out and some other recent Trump decisions with, like, Melania playing the "you're fired" card. That was
weird. Tell us about that.
But basically, like, Melania Trump has said in previous statements that she had issues with a couple individuals in Trump's administration, and that she didn't like how some people operated and people not being qualified and being there. And one of the individuals in particular, she came out the other day in a press release and basically said that she was not worthy of the job, and that her husband needed to let her go.
A day after Deputy National Security Advisor Mira Ricardel public criticism from the Office of the First Lady of the White House on Wednesday, as she will be leaving her post. So, yeah, this is a little unusual. This is the first time that the First Lady has ever taken a hard stance in a public sense against the cabinet makeup of a sitting president, and that actually has led to the removal of a high-ranking official that we've been aware of. You pretty much covered all the details that we are privy to. It sounds like she really just had some sort of, I don't want to say personal animosity against her.
There was definitely some beef there. But one of the things, this is what I wanted to talk about with this is that, like, since the election, we've always gotten reports that, like, Trump is displeased, Trump is angry. I have good reason to believe that this man is now genuinely very upset. And there have been a lot of reports recently that have been, corroborating that sentiment, that Trump is angry at everyone that that he lost the House, and that the Republicans lost the midterms, and that things are going to shit for him, and it's about goddamn time.
Well, it's interesting because before the election, when we were pretty confident that we were going to be able to flip the House, at least, we saw a lot of people saying, okay, we know that the president has had episodes of being unstable and back and forth and all this kind of stuff, but now we're really going to see what he's like when he feels threatened, when he genuinely feels like he needs to be pointing the finger and legitimately blaming people. And he's come out very vitriolic against the Mueller probe this week. and this is surprising because we haven't heard that much from the Mueller probe lately.
Well, and that's because the FBI and the Justice Department and the CIA all stay out of stuff when it comes. They always go very, very quiet when it comes to election seasons.
They used to.
They're supposed to.
They're
okay,
supposed
real quick.
to.
James Comey.
2016.
James Comey.
Jim.
That tree stalk of a man.
Okay, careful now.
Brett, just you're the same size as James Comey.
I know, so I'm saying be careful.
You're
Don't be sizist.
okay, fine. Look, James Comey, being the very tall individual he is, he broke precedent and it cost Hillary the election, and I'm still salty.
Yeah, I have no idea why he did what he did, but he did do what he did do. So
He was like, oh, my hands are tied. If I don't tell people, it's bad. But if I tell people, then I have to tell people because it would be bad if it happened after the election. However, Trump was under investigation. You didn't tell us then either, huh?
He's like one of the single most confusing people because he's like, you want to genuinely believe that he is very just neutral and I don't want to say altruistic, but he kept fucking memos of every single meeting he ever had with candidate Trump. And he's like, I don't feel right about this. And then he does really ethically questionable things. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know about him.
I don't know. He holds himself to be an extremely moral individual. And I'm sure throughout most of his time he has acted in such a manner.
You follow him on Twitter? You
No.
should see his Twitter page.
I do follow him on. I occasionally do look.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
It's yeah. Thanks for canvassing and getting out the vote though the other day. We really appreciated that one.
Yeah.
Okay, we're getting way off topic.
Back to present day news.
Back to present day news. Trump is really, really pissed at everyone.
Yeah.
And it's gonna. I think Kirsten Nielsen is gonna be out.
Yeah, he in an interview with the Daily Caller, I believe it was, made a pretty strong suggestion that she's going to be on her way out.
Gone.
Well, I mean, we can expect turnover here pretty soon. It's not unusual with midterms, especially ones that go poorly for the president's party.
I was surprised to see only Sessions being fired after. I was expecting a lot more.
Yeah, this is true. Sessions, of course, not a small name. It's a little unusual. Well, it's one thing when these people genuinely resign. It's another when they get fired. And in terms of that, with Matthew Whitaker, his replacement, the acting attorney general right now, people still really want to get him under oath to talk about the Mueller investigation. I personally don't think it's going to happen. He has no incentive to go before the Senate, especially, again, in his job as acting AG. He's not going to be there for that long. Mm-hmm. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think he has the time or support to be able to do anything substantial.
Let's hope
to
not.
Mueller. Yeah, I mean, that's postulation to the nth degree. But we haven't heard much from Matthew Whitaker about Matthew Whitaker in a couple days, and I wouldn't be surprised if we don't hear anything again until we actually have our names put forward for who the next AG is going to be.
Lindsey Graham.
Yeah, let's hope not. God, that'd be embarrassing.
Yes. Okay. I think we've.
Do you want to talk about Elvis? Oh, it's okay.
Elvis.
Tell us about it.
Elvis. Elvis is everywhere. Elvis has a medal of freedom.
Him and everybody else,
yeah.
Adam.
Okay, so Trump.
Me, Mr. Magoo.
Look, I wish we had one, Brett.
Well, no.
Trump went on a bit of a spree in handing out presidential medals of freedom, which are basically the highest award civilians can get.
Yep.
So first off, President Trump, I would also like one.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day.
If you believe hard enough.
So, over the past couple of days, the White House and Trump specifically have been handing out U.S. presidential medals of freedom like it's candy on the 31st of October. Among the list of so real quick to go into it, it's the highest award that a civilian can receive from the U.S. government.
Right.
It's basically the Medal of Honor for non-weaponized people.
Yeah.
So.
Non-weaponized people. For civilians.
For civilians.
People who are non-weaponized.
Yes.
It's America, baby. We're all weaponized.
I was going to say, that was poor phrasing in that regard. But, Obama gave one to Joe Biden at the end of his term.
That was a touching.
I literally cried. I did the same to Nick Eberly when I ended my term as president.
Yeah, I remember that, actually.
There's a great photo of it. It's nice and cute.
Yeah, the Medal of Freedom is usually something that presidents give out partially for good publicity, to be perfectly honest. I mean, they go generally to people who
have really made a difference. There are a lot of influencers,
and
I think a lot of the people actually on this list, I think they would qualify.
I would disagree, but go ahead.
I think some of them do. But
I would still disagree, but go ahead.
Ellen DeGeneres has one, and Ellen is, while absolutely wonderful and a groundbreaking individual and fully deserving of this. I lost my point.
You explain to me how Babe Ruth deserves a Medal of Freedom.
Okay. Yes. So among this list,
fat racist
Babe Ruth, who is a fat racist. The late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. Other people like NFL Hall of Famer Roger Staubach.
Yeah.
Alan Page, another sporting icon. People that we don't know much about.
Republican mega donor. Well, first of all, Utah, senior senator from Utah, Orrin Hatch also got one, I think, for being alive longer than anybody.
Yeah, for being the longest, oldest individual.
The oldest person ever.
When he's finally leaving the Senate. Elvis joins a lengthy list of musician stars, including Ella Fitzgerald, Bob Dylan, and Stevie Wonder. Yeah. Wow, that's cool. Elvis on here, I just really love Elvis. So, I find it fitting that he deserves one.
That's fair.
I think he does.
Another thing for... Again, just something fun that the White House does every so often.
Yeah, and this is...
We can be critical of it, but it's cool.
We can, but also, it doesn't really matter, fam. It doesn't really matter.
No. More news just to kind of get around for the rest of the week. Today was a big day for news, November 16th. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos announced sweeping rule changes on how colleges handle cases of sexual assault and harassment. So... pretty in line with the logic of this administration and people who identify with this administration. They're wanting to essentially change the proceedings under Title IX regulations for when people claim acts of sexual assault. They're wanting to change the rules to favor a little more the accused rather than the accuser. This fundamentally comes from a place of this perpetuated claim that people are just needlessly making claims of sexual assault and allegations of sexual assault, and that we need to be protecting the people who have these claims made against them because it can ruin your life. I don't have the statistics in front of me to begin to suggest how many substantiated claims are legitimate or how many substantiated claims are illegitimate. I don't know what the findings end up being on that, but what I can tell you is that simply from personal experience in serving as a student advisor on a college campus for 3 years now and attending a college for 4 years now, that we have had too many instances of sexual assault not being reported because people are terrified of the process. The process is a quasi-judicial one, which is inherently confrontational in a way that can be just as scarring as the act itself sometimes, and it does not lend itself very well to protect the people who are coming forward. So in some of these rule changes, making it to where the accuser is less protected is not going to help people who are genuine victims of these kinds of crimes feel any more comfortable doing it. I don't know at the end of the day what information they have to say that this is justifiable or that this is a better solution. To me, it's like a lot of other things, it's 3-4 steps back from what we had gotten out of the Obama administration.
Yeah, it is rolling back some Obama era mandates about Title IX and implementation that had been implemented over the past couple of years.
Right.
Actually, I'm glad you bring this up because the other day, my girlfriend sent me an article from Purdue where she attends, college as well, and this was this crazy instance because you hear sometimes about universities protecting athletes that have been accused of sexual assault and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But this actually, Purdue is being sued currently because 2 females 2 years ago were sexually assaulted, and they reported it to the university. And then what ended up happening is both of them were actually expelled because of it. Like the victims were expelled. They were investigated without their knowledge. There were held trials over them, and basically because they weren't able to turn over enough evidence about what happened, which is a very high level of evidence, and these things are quite hard to. It's hard to prosecute these in most cases unless you have other witnesses or or physical evidence, and
Right.
if it's reported very quickly. But
Right.
it's very hard to do that most of the time, which makes the process even more difficult. But what ended up happening is both males that were accused, they got marginal sentences, nothing big. They weren't expelled. They didn't lose their privileges.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, the two females that were expelled, were let back in. But it just shows how, I mean, even at I think Purdue also has a massive issue with rape and sexual assault that is far too systemic and far too widespread. And I think that's the case with far too many colleges and universities.
And again, this is much more from personal experience than a statistic at Truman that I know.
Yeah.
But you talk to anybody that's ever gone out anywhere to any party or social gathering or anything like that, and you can find 10 girls in a room, and out of the 10 girls who had something happen to them that night that was non-consensual and inappropriate. And it's difficult because, like you said, the proceedings are not straightforward. A lot of universities and institutions have the liberty to handle them differently.
Mm-hmm.
The Title IX does not detail exactly step for step how places should go about these investigatory processes. So doesn't always it's not a perfect system.
Yeah.
It's far from it. And instead of working towards making it better, more comprehensive, to say, let's get to the bottom of what's actually going on here, it's becoming more deferential.
This White House is making it even more difficult.
But it's worth noting that these proposed changes, will not take effect for some time. There is an open comment and forum period that they have to go under. Any sort of policy changes to departments like this have to go under these kinds of things. And this is not changing the law. It's simply changing the guidelines through which the law is executed, essentially. So this isn't a guarantee that these things are going to happen, but like everything that's coming out of this education department, we've seen deference to for-profit colleges. We've seen programs taken away from, or money and full programs taken away from student loan forgiveness, things like that. Our education department is working against education, essentially.
Any form of public education has been under threat from this Department of Education. So, one last story before we get into our political science topic, and this is coming out of Cambodia, so Indochina, out in Asia. This story has to deal with the Khmer Rouge and the genocide that occurred in Cambodia. It was throughout the 60s and 70s, and part of the 80s. It was the genocide itself lasted less than that, but it was a nasty regime. The Khmer Rouge are an agrarian Marxist political party that came to power in Cambodia after World War II. After a lot of they were invaded by Japan throughout the war, and the Asian Front, which is oftentimes not studied by us Americans, was fully fledged in this arena and in this area. They also had some business kicking out the French in Vietnam and aiding them throughout this period. Because a lot of our time attacking Vietnam throughout the Vietnam War, some of it actually did occur in Cambodia against the Khmer Rouge, who were aides and friends of the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army. So to get into this, their genocide was declared. But with that comes certain international responsibilities of the United Nations and other international bodies to actually prosecute the rulers and the leaders and the military officials oftentimes that actually carried out these killings or led them. And so about 1 million people or so were killed in Cambodia. And it wasn't specific demographics, but oftentimes anyone of Japanese descent, anyone of the Muslim faith, anyone that wore glasses, was well educated, traveled. These were all characteristics that made you up for being a victim of the Khmer Rouge. So anyways, actually it's very interesting because Khmer Rouge, until a couple of years ago, still controlled
Khmer Rouge,
a large part of the northeast territory of Cambodia, and with that, they lost. They've been coming to terms, and Cambodia's been getting over this, but it's still a traumatic event in this area, and I'm glad to see that finally some prosecution is occurring. So that's all I have.
All right, ladies and gentlemen,
Welcome back.
So our political science topic for this week, as we teased at the top of the pod, we're going to take this a little international.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the news stories that I'm sure everyone heard about from last week, from Armistice Day, was that our president went all the way to France simply to skip out on an international meeting of the World War I powers in the 100th year celebration of
The 100th
the end of
anniversary.
World War I.
The Great War. The war to end all wars
We haven't
until
had a
20
war
years
since.
later.
We haven't had one war since. We've not. Not a single one. Some spats, some disagreements,
Just a few.
some Nazis, but no wars. So the story that most people are familiar with is that our president went all the way to Paris and then skipped out on the ceremony because it was raining. Feel free to criticize that however you want. Probably the more interesting thing for us that came out of it was the backlash from the world leaders,
Yes.
specifically Emmanuel
Macron.
Yeah, Macaroon.
Macron.
The French president had a lot to say about it. His diplomacy is applauded in this scenario because he didn't come out and just straight attack, the president, which a lot of people are wanting to do, us included. He came out and denounced nationalism and really gave a message that spoke to liberalism and a world community that's tied together in an effort to progress rights on all fronts.
Yeah, and he did this 1 week after Trump came out, on stage at some campaign and was like, "I am a nationalist."
Right.
I can't do a Trump either, so it's fine.
We need to work on that.
We
We'll
really do.
workshop it. Get it
Okay,
right.
real quick. If any of our listeners can do a killer Trump impression, we will have you on the podcast every week.
Every single one. Just have you in the background.
just
essentially.
in case we need you.
Right. So that was a pretty inspirational message, to be honest, and a good reminder of the direction we should be headed,
Thank God.
as opposed to the one that America seems to be headed. Something else that was interesting that came out of this, we saw a lot of pictures of Macron and Angela Merkel, the German the German chancellor. They have really attempted to take Europe in a direction that I don't want to say is less tied to America, but I think a lot of European powers are realizing that they can't necessarily be 100% dependent on us.
Yeah. And that's a recent trend that has begun,
Right.
Explicitly because of Trump.
Right.
Like that is not, the Europe has been moving towards globalization and other like worldly views, really coming together with the United Nations is an aspect of that, but more importantly, like the European Union's expansion,
Right.
And like the progression and integration of the economies of Europe are very important. And they've really taken the role of, helping out, those countries, specifically like Italy and Greece, which can't seem to tax people correctly.
Yeah. Governmental
Holding
problems.
government. But anyways, and they've really been strained as of late because largely of the immigration issue that Europe is facing with
Yeah, it's
the
a big
large
one.
amount of refugees coming out of the Middle East due to the Syrian
It's a big one.
conflict, the Libyan conflict. And other just terrorist or civil wars that occur within that part of the world.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's worth attempting to quickly kind of recount how we got here to where we're at. So obviously,
let's take it way back.
Yeah, let's take it way back. So obviously, America was not a superpower back when it was just a bunch of land inhabited by the Native Americans. And
Better
then
time though,
a simpler time and a much better time.
for a lot of people.
Yeah,
like
and-
homosexuals, women. Which
Well,
were
I don't
actually
know.
recognized. No, they were recognized by
By the Native American tribes?
by many
Yeah.
the Iroquois especially.
Yes,
the nation there
yes.
is.
No, the Native Americans had their shit together, and then we ruined
They
it for
really
them.
did. And
But-
then guns, germs, and steel showed up.
Right. So before we got here, obviously Europe was the dominant superpower, and China, every so often, got into the mix. But we start colonizing America, we start developing and everything, and Europe maintains their superiority basically throughout all of history, and then World War I happens. You can maybe argue the War of 1812, the French-American, or the French...
the 7 Years War.
Yeah, the 7 Years War. A number of wars started the collapse of the European superiority, and the Industrial Revolution kind of elevated us. But I think really you can draw the first distinct line at the end of World War I, because
Oh yeah.
the European economy was in ruins. I mean,
Shambles.
they call it a world war for a reason. It really was the European war. But
Okay. And that's another misconception here. There was fighting throughout China during this time. Some parts of Africa went into conflict. Europe as well, especially. Europe was the main front there.
Yes.
But there was different aspects throughout the world of different fighting. This is also when Imperial Japan became a thing.
This is true.
And that's they fought at the end of World War I against the Chinese, who were having a lovely civil war.
Well,
at the time.
Japan just got done with the war.
Or they were overthrowing their monarchy.
Ooh. And they got in a spat with Russia right before World War I.
Yes, they did. With the Russo-Japanese War of 1905 to 1907.
So the early 1900s
by
was
which the Russians lost.
Great year for industrialization.
And the Ottoman Empire is also a thing that's collapsing at the time. Guys, I am a giant history nerd, and it is about to show.
Yeah, there was a lot of reordering of the world order going on in the early 1900s. But for the sake of retracing what happened last week, the European economy was in shambles after World War I.
And shout out to my boy Princip for causing it all down in the Balkans.
Yeah. And so then 20 years after World War I, we have World War II, obviously, which did not contribute to bolstering anybody's economy. It only further
besides ours.
ruined them. Besides
the
ours,
United States benefited greatly
That's
from
the thing,
World War II.
because we didn't have to put up with our lives getting bombed to pieces. We actually were able to prosper on the back end
because of great Keynesian economic policies instituted by our Lord and Savior, FDR.
Debatable. I'm going to push back and say neoliberal policies did not take a hands-off approach.
Institutions.
Regardless, what we saw in the effort to rebuild the world economy, especially the European economy, was America really started to institute these different types of trade deals and treaties that really started to make people interdependent on one another. And this was to liberalize the world economy. This was to make it so that everyone could benefit from the progress coming out of rebuilding from the rubble of everything. And part of that was all of the European powers, because we essentially, and we meaning the U.S., encouraged all of this, said, you guys cannot behave since you're right next to each other. You should probably not have huge standing armies.
Because we don't want this happening again.
Right.
And largely, the United States was able to do this because they emerged from World War II having 60% of the world's military power lied within the United States. There was no one besides the Russians really that could even pose a challenge.
At that point, the Russians could not pose. How were they going to get over here? Their rowboats?
No, they
didn't have a navy to speak of.
Yeah, the Russians, they were depleted, though they could have taken over all of Europe. That's also a thing. But at this
Let's
time,
jam their guns with our bodies.
Okay, they have that's their philosophy.
Yeah,
they have way more of that. No, to go back on it though, the United States became the world systems leader after World War II, and we talked about this on the second pod when we talked about homogeny and or hegemony, however you speak it.
However you speak it.
However
you say it.
We're not going to be prescriptivist on here,
right? And so again, we came out of the Second World War. We said, okay, Europe, no more big standing armies. If you need an army, you come talk to us. We have it. We'll help you out. More or less how we get to NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Woo.
And fast forward a couple more decades, there's a little bit more cohesion forming in Europe because everyone has this understanding that they're all in this together.
Oh, yeah.
Very High School Musical.
Europe, at this time, we instituted the Marshall Plan right after World War II, rebuilt Europe. They're largely dependent on the United States. And when we mean Europe here, we're basically meaning all of Western Europe.
Right.
Because Eastern Europe is currently under a very heavy...
They're behind the Iron Curtain
Yes, the Iron Curtain.
The closest we could do was West Germany. So East Germany, all the Slavic countries, Russia as we know it today, are all exempted from everything we're talking about right now. But again, then you fast forward a little bit more in the 60s, 70s, 80s. We start to form trade deals on this side of the world. Really, it was
NAFTA?
NAFTA.
That was created in the 90s.
I know. I'm getting to it, though. So we start to really foster a lot of these trade deals, and it culminates in NAFTA in the 90s. And this was something that...
of course, after the Soviet Union falls...
Yeah,
we have skipped a lot here.
A ton of stuff here, but I'm trying to speed through to get to my point here. And NAFTA happens and everything like that, and we start to form this cohesion with the North American continent, and that really makes us the trade superpower. So what does Europe do and says, okay, we can't always be dependent on America. We have to kind of be able to branch off on our own and be dependent. They formed the EU, which is an attempt to accomplish similar goals of saying, let's all be together, let's have open borders, let's be able to trade more effectively so we can have a similar say on this side of the world. So what we saw with Macron this past week, and again, I'm sorry, I'm skipping so much, and I would love to talk about this for an hour, but we don't have that kind of time.
This is not a history podcast.
No, it's not. It could be, but not this week. We'll make another podcast.
I've had
all
enough
about
tangents
history.
today. All right.
So what we saw with Macron from this last week is this suggestion that, okay, we cannot continue to be dependent on America forever. We had the EU, which Britain is trying really hard to kind of fuck up. But
what the hell?
We can talk about that too. Macron said, we can no longer be completely dependent on America. We have NATO, which says, let's borrow the troops from America anytime we need it. But let's not be dependent on that.
Yeah.
Let's start building our own armies. Let's start being able to protect our own sovereignty. We can all do this under the name of the EU, so it's still liberal in essence. But again, and I think this is something that's ultimately good. Though I'm always kind of cautious when Europe says let's build standing armies again, because that has never gone well.
Italy, how about you just Italy and Greece, maybe Poland?
We'll exempt some of them from the... Well, again, we're talking Western countries here.
Well, they're all part of the EU,
This is true.
So, and some of them even, the Baltic states are okay. You can have your armies. You need them because Russia's about to come. So.
This is very true. But the implications of even this kind of rhetoric, I mean, obviously there have been no steps taken to achieve any of this, but it's all very indicative of the direction we're potentially headed. I think whoever comes after Trump, we have the potential in getting in on the ground floor in this and being a player in this. I think the ball is already in motion, and we can't really stop this whole notion. Because, again, the problems of Europe are a lot more significant than our problems. The immigration issue is first and foremost the biggest bone of contention over there that we don't have to deal with. They have to worry about everyone coming over from the Middle East, fleeing the destabilization that we caused.
Yep.
And we don't have to. And
I think largely what that has also led to recently is a lot of these far-right parties, these very anti-immigration, isolationist, nationalist parties in Europe. Nationalist over there basically means Nazi, so you can take that as you want.
Not that it doesn't mean that over here, too.
Yeah, it should mean that here, but anyways. What that has led recently to a large upcropping of these parties. A lot of them hold seats places. A far-right candidate just won a seat, or just won the prime ministership of Austria. But you see this with the Golden Dawn down in Greece. Sweden has issues with this. The French not the French Front. What is it called?
Yeah, I know
Le Front National or something like that.
I want to say it's like the French Liberation Front, but
I think that's what it is.
I don't think that's it.
Is it the...
Maybe, I don't know.
I don't know.
It's like the
Le Pen.
Le
Pen.
Well, it's crazy because we even saw that in Brazil.
Yeah, my God, guys, Brazil has... Yes, who wants to basically make Brazil an authoritative, a bureaucratic authoritarian regime again, which he has publicly stated that, it would work better if it was.
Right.
So yeah, we're losing, and this, it's not due to Trump, but it's largely due to the kind of mercantilist, neo-realist pushback against the global system by which has been created for the past 70 fucking years.
Yeah.
And so, the rise of China as this new world power that will very soon probably take it. Look, the issue is China doesn't have much of an interest in getting militarily, established like the United States has. They're more economic, and they've done a very good job of breaching out and branching to all different kinds of, over the developing world. You have the BRICS Bank, which has begun, which is basically a counter to the International Monetary Fund, aka the IMF and the World Bank and other Bretton Woods systems that the United States created after World War II.
Everyone's doing it better than us now.
So basically...
Well, okay, I think, overarching point, because I kind of got to the end of this, and I'm like, what are we saying here? I think an overarching point is we are seeing the rise of these scary far-right nationalist political leaders in places like Brazil and Hungary and
Austria,
Poland
especially.
Poland, in these kinds of places. But at the same time, we have counteracting forces like Macron, like Angela Merkel, who are saying we have evils that are cropping up that we don't fully understand what they're capable of yet. We don't fully understand the danger that they potentially pose. We need to continue to unite. We need to continue to work with one another. But we also need to recognize that we cannot blindly follow each other into the dark. Sometimes we need to be accountable for ourselves, and we need to be accountable for our friends. So this kind of plays into it's a scary time in America because we're living through a nightmare right now. And it was a very real, it was a potential reality for France when Macron got elected because Le Pen was someone who's very ideologically aligned with somebody like Trump. Angela Merkel narrowly beat out a couple of Nazis in Germany as well with her last election.
And well, Germany has an interesting relationship with this because it's legal.
Interesting relationship with Nazis.
Okay, well, like today, like they have a lot of censorship laws that basically, like, you basically it is legally it is
illegal
against the law to be a Nazi.
Right.
A lot of the nationalist stuff is Germany is
They're very
wings
sensitive
away
to
from
it.
a lot of these things. Germany's probably the best at it. And there are some other countries that really, really need to get on board with this because fascism basically took over half of Europe at one point, and way too many of them are acting like it never did.
Yeah, and so we've reached, I don't know, a critical mass of some kind to say maybe we've forgotten history and what happens when people take these approaches, and so we're testing the waters again. But it's good to see that there are world leaders out there who are sensing the uneasiness on the horizon.
Yeah. And I
the
think
instability on the horizon.
And one of the things that I'm cynical about, I'm putting it on the Brett cap real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Angela Merkel, it will most likely lose her next
She's
election.
not running again. She announced it.
Yes, but that is scary because she wasn't going to win. And going into German politics real quick, the National Party by which Angela Merkel represents doesn't exist on like the federal side of things because it's largely based in Bavaria, which is in southern Germany, border of Baden, which is where my homeland is. But the Bavarian party there is led by a different individual, and he is been very anti-immigration, which very much goes counter to the conservative party in coalition by which Angela Merkel represents. So it's scary to see that Angela will be probably replaced by someone who is not as worldview, who doesn't have the same worldview as her.
Not as interested in liberalism.
Exactly. Not the same kind of globalist that Macron or people like President Obama would have been. Hopefully, I hope, dear God, England, kick out Theresa May.
It's going to happen.
Please put in a liberal. Put in someone from the Labour
with
Party.
As horrible as right now there are so many MPs calling for a vote of no confidence to kick her out.
Yeah.
So we could very easily see that happening pretty soon.
And I really hope the bababoon of Boris Johnson is also taken down because that man is an orangutan.
So what's our overarching point with all of this? We are again. It's the point that we've been making for 3, 4, 5 weeks now. It's just that we are actively living in a time of political change on the world stage, and it's entertaining to watch these events happen. Also very scary.
It is, and it will be very interesting to see how things progress. Right. I think political science as a discipline is going to progress drastically in this next day and age. I think it's safe to say now that the United States is now in a position on the decline, and it will be, what I believe, and we've discussed this with the power transition theory that, or in the power cycle theory, that I think the United States is going to face off soon enough with a major world, a challenge from China. I think Russia will have a part in this because Russia is acting way more powerful than it actually is, and largely, can do so and has done so, since its revolution back in 1917. Because we're doing history on this pod. So I think that it will be very interesting to see how things progress and how the system by which the United States has created is no longer being led by the United States. And it's very interesting to see that it has not fully held together, that you still have people like Macron, like Merkel, that have taken the torch and will continue, running forward towards the light at the end of the tunnel that is neoliberal capitalist democracy.
It's going to be something. It's certainly going to be something.
I hope it gets there.
Yeah.
Welcome to the end of history, everyone.
So to end on a light note, we're going to bring it back to the election. Because I can't help myself.
Oh, good. All right, we're not done. This is the last pod, we promise. Next, we're going to talk
promise
2020 presidential candidates.
Florida's not going to be done by next week.
Oh my God.
So to end this on a light note.
Oh, we didn't fucking touch on Florida.
No, don't worry. We'll get to it. So to end on a light note, though America might be headed down the shitter that we've known about this, counts and recounts and doubly recounts are still coming in, but with the House, Democrats have taken 229 seats to the Republicans' 200. There are still 6 seats, all of which I believe are in California, most of which are looking like they're going to go to the Democrats. So, yes, we are a little partial to the Democratic Party, and we do think they're going to be doing great things. A little partial to the Democratic Party.
Hold up here. The entire podcast has been based around the Democratic Party.
You're right. So maybe,
this is not a podcast
maybe we're a little
Republicans.
biased towards the Democratic Party. But with the decline of American exceptionalism and our place in this world, it is all not completely lost. We do have a House that is in charge of everything domestically. This includes everything with taxes, everything with health care, anything that relates to you as a person, including education, has to come from the House. And now we have the most diverse House in American history. We have more representation of the American people than ever before, and these are bright, these are talented, these are motivated, hardworking individuals who are interested in implementing real change. It's not going to be easy. The Senate is still controlled by the Republicans. However,
even more so now than before,
we have an incredible launching point to start these movements, to start these conversations, to get legislation into the House, to keep people accountable.
And we got oversight, baby.
And so though we just said that, the world order might be changing here in America, this is not the end of this fight, not even close. We have plenty of opportunities to take our country back and to get us back on track for the progress that we started in 2008, that we continued in 2012, and we can see just as much progress in 2020. So
exactly. We are going to see throughout this next stage of the American populace, the next political cycle, we're going to see oversight on Trump.
Absolutely.
We're going to see an expansion and a movement of, democratic values.
Right. We're going to get people their health care back.
Exactly. We're going to get people health care. We're going to hopefully work on immigration.
We're going to restore education
do as
in this
much
country.
as possible.
Absolutely.
Without having to deal with the Senate and signing something from Trump. But what we're going to also do, we're going to be able to block things.
Right.
Block things, people.
We're going to stop.
We're going to be able to say, hey, no wall. Hey, no detaining of children. Hey,
stop taking away people's health care.
Tax cuts for the rich.
Stop taking away people's education.
We're going to do that.
Stop
We're
taking
going
away
to
people's homes.
be able to just throw up blockers on everything.
Right.
And while this may not be the next extremely productive time, we got to remember that despite the fact that we have some power, we don't have all of it, and we certainly don't have enough of it.
But this is the fighting spirit of America.
But we got this.
At
we
our
won,
lowest.
and we can do it again.
At our lowest, we were able to fight back and achieve what we have achieved. So,
pull ourselves up from our bootstraps.
We go from here straight to the top, folks.
Because the only thing we have to fear
is Donald J. Trump.
No, I was going to fear itself.
That too.
Ebola. No.
And the
All right.
caravan.
And the caravan.
That's a podcast.
I am so glad I'm editing this one.
The 36% was founded, written, and directed by Adam Childers Arnold and Brett Combs.
Music provided by Purple Planet. Check them out at www.purpleplanet.com.
Our presenting sponsors, the wonderful Avian Apparel.
Music editing done by Adam California.
Our ukulele music is provided by the talented Adam California.
Cover art by Cristione Fergusone.
Thank you so much to everyone who tuned into this episode, who is a proud subscriber to the 36%, and who voted in 2018.
And remember, guys, tell your friends, go like, go subscribe, hit us up with those comments.
Absolutely.
Follow us on Twitter at the 36 Podcast. Get this pod out, fam.
Bro.
It's about time that you start getting recognized as great fans.
We do all this work for you, now do some work for us, you ungrateful listeners.
Go canvas for the 36%. Go knock on some doors.
Thank you so much for listening, guys.
You guys are wonderful. We love you all dearly. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, everybody.
It's been one hell of an episode and one hell of a week. So, signing off for this week, I'm Brett.
And I'm Adam.
This has been
the
36%.